Your token utility is the first thing you need to understand. You need to figure this out before you can move on to the tokenomics, the fundraising, the supply side, the airdrops, the policies, and anything else. You need to understand what exactly is your token going to do. Now, there is a deeper question beyond that, which is, do you even need a token to begin with? Most projects in crypto are just companies. How many companies in Web2 have tokens? Zero, none of them, right? So clearly we don't really need tokens in the vast majority of cases. The reason why that's important is because the reason why most tokens exist in crypto is because it's easier to fundraise with them, or it was before, not really anymore, but it was easier to fundraise with them, and then it's easier to cash out because it's a lot more liquid. So you dump it onto retail, everyone makes money except retail, of course, unless you're the earlier retail. Anyways, whole problem in the space. But regardless, that's why tokens existed. It's for those kind of surface level reasons. It's not really for true, deep, core purposes, except for a few. Some of them, of course, did exist for that reason. And that's what these three purposes are that we've identified as simplicity group. This is the why. Why does your token need to exist on a core fundamental level? If it doesn't, that's not a problem too much, right? You can still survive, you can still have a good token, right? Because there's just benefits, there's actual benefits to having a token. But the really core why is answered either with these three answers here. So decentralization. If you're a company, but you're really decentralized, you don't have a legal entity, you don't have a team, right? It's just community owned, community led. You still, as a founder, need to make sure that your project doesn't just go to zero, it doesn't just die. You need to make sure that you have a way to incentivize good behavior and penalize bad behavior, a carrot and a stick, if you will. How do you do that? Well, you need a token. Because if your users are good, then you reward them with tokens, you mint some tokens, whatever it is. And if your users are bad, then you slash them, you take them away. There go the carrot and the stick, right? You can't really do that with Web2 assets. You can't really do that with air miles or anything like that because, first of all, it's not transparent in the sense that a smart contract for this, for this token will be public and it'll be transparent and it'll be immutable, and therefore people will trust it more, especially in a decentralized ecosystem. Also, it's probably just harder doing it with Web2 tools because if you are a decentralized project, it inherently implies that anyone from around the world, whether it's Cuba or Russia or Ukraine or North Korea or China or wherever else in the world, can access this project. And if you have a wallet, then you can access anything in crypto. If it's not crypto related, if you don't have tokens, well, then you need to set up some sort of Web2 rails in order to incentivize people. And it's just a lot of tedious, hard work, and it's pointless, and it's not as easy to do as with a token. That is reason number one, a core reason number one. Number two is sovereignty. What this means is you want to have control over your own monetary and fiscal policies. You want to make sure that your inflation rate, your fees, your taxes, your rewards, your flows, everything is controlled by you and isn't reliant on another asset. For example, if you have an ecosystem, right, you have a project, you have an economy, this token is very inherent to it. It's used, by the users as a medium of exchange. Maybe you have it locked up, driving your TVL, whatever it is. What if you use someone else's token? You can integrate Bitcoin for this reason, right? You can integrate a stable coin into your ecosystem. But the problem is, what happens if it gets hacked? What happens if there's a 51% attack? What happens if the founders of that particular asset turn out to be bad and they're jailed and the whole asset goes down to zero, right? You don't want that. You don't want that risk. So you use a token because a token gives you sovereignty. You're not reliant on anyone else. You have full avoidance of counterparty risk. It's your token. If you send it to zero, only you are sending it to zero. There is nobody else involved, right? That is very, very important because even if you don't have this fundamental reason of decentralization for the token, anyone really and truly can fit into this reason for sovereignty because in the future world where our global currency, the dollar, is collapsing, well, what do you use? Do you use a dollar-denominated stablecoin? Is that really good? Probably not. Why not use your own currency, right? Plus, you tie these two things together, decentralization and sovereignty, and you can have users from all over the world, and they can use your token to transact, and you're avoiding counterparty risk, and you're really, really in control over your entire ecosystem. The third purpose is data. This is mainly applicable for NFTs or tokenized assets, but you're just storing data within it, and it's easier for things like supply chains and similar projects like that where there's a lot of information and use the blockchain to store it. Well, you need some sort of I mean, you don't necessarily need tokens as far as I'm aware, but having tokens in that regard, again, like as NFTs, generally might be a good idea. But these two are the main kind of two fundamental whys. Now, how does that translate into token utilities? Well, decentralization, the main token utility for decentralization is just, of course you want to have your token be a reward, right, for good behavior, and you need to have it be slashable for bad behavior. So you have some sort of staking where the stakers have, a say in the ecosystem, and if they're malicious, then they get slashed. The logic behind it you can figure out, but that's the core utilities for this sort of token. For the sovereignty token, this, again, as I said, is applicable to basically everything else, right? You just want to have your own currency for your own ecosystem. Whether that's the real reason you have a token or whether it's because you wanted to fundraise, regardless, you can still fall under sovereignty. And every utility can be applicable here. But these two things are not necessarily related, right? This is just to understand your why. This is for you to go to an investor and you say, this is why we have the token. This is why when you go and invest into our equity with a token warrant or a convertible note, this is why the token will have value behind it. Now, of course, an investor will care primarily about your marketing spend on the token, and that's where the market cap of the token will grow, and therefore they can sell the tokens onto the market. That's a conversation for another day. But regardless, if you have a really deep why for the token, you're set. You're in good hands, right? But you don't necessarily need it. Anyways, how do you figure out what the utility actually is? Again, for decentralization, we already established it, but what about for sovereignty, right? You just have your own token, your own currency in your ecosystem. But what does that mean? What exactly is the token going to do in our ecosystem? Well, we can figure it out as follows. You first need to have a business. You first need to have a company, right? And you're selling goods and services. So maybe this is you as the company, and then this is your first user. You're giving them a good or a service, and they are paying you in good old dollars, right? This is the flow. Maybe in your ecosystem you have another user, right? And this user is also interacting with this user, and they're sending each other money, and they're sending each other products. Maybe this user is also, let's use this green, maybe this user is also paying you a monthly subscription for premium access to the platform. This is your economy. These are your flows of value between the users, between the company. Maybe there is someone else here, maybe there's something else here. You have flows of value in your economy. And what you need to think about is, okay, what can we tokenize, right? Maybe this monthly subscription, we can tokenize that. And instead of it being a monthly subscription, the user can stake in order to access the premium features. Maybe instead of these two users transacting, in dollars, right, and then sending each other products, maybe they can transact in tokens, so we can tokenize this as well, right? That's how you think about it. And then from there you go. There's your two token utilities. You use it as a medium of exchange between different users within your platform, and you use it for stake, for accessing better features. There you go. Maybe you also want to incentivize people who are, providing liquidity, right? LPs. Well, right now you're incentivizing them with dollars, but you can tokenize that as well. Another token is used also as a reward for LPs, right? Every single utility, at least in my eyes, is a subsequent of one of these four core granddaddy utilities, right? So number one is medium of exchange. That is very simple. People within your economy use the token to trade, to transact, right? So for example here, two users using it as a medium of exchange. That's applicable to basically everyone. Access and benefits, generally a subsequent of staking. So you stake in order to access premium features. You stake in order to get discounts on your trading fees. You stake in order to get a higher yield. You stake in order to participate in some sort of lottery. Staking to access or to get benefits, right? Or maybe just benefits in general, like rewards and incentives. That is another very big kind of underlying core utility. Every project has different benefits, different access tools, etc. But that's the core utility, is you lock up the token and you get something in return. Of course, this is also applicable for infrastructure like layer ones, where you lock up the tokens, right, in order to have, be able to run a validator node, right? You also need to lock up tokens there, but again, you may be accessing, you can see that as accessing the validation program. The third one is governance or insurance, if you will. It's more, it's kind of more like third level utility. So medium of exchange is very direct. It's kind of like, if I was to put it like level 1, right? Super direct. I'm just sending money with the token. Level 2 is access. So I'm locking the token up to get something else in return. This kind of level 3, it's even more, ethereal than that, if you will, where I'm using the token for political power or for insurance. Again, maybe we can apply validators here, like where you lock up the tokens and it's kind of like an insurance to the protocol that you'll be a good actor. Maybe you can see insurance as, for example, literal insurance, where people lock up the token and they become the kind of the exchange's B-book order book, right? Like the liquidity pool for a decentralized exchange to trade perps against, or maybe insurance for lending and borrowing, whatever it is, right? But it's kind of like these other reasons for the token, right? Insurance isn't really the most important thing here. You can cross insurance, have governance, but whatever. That's these reasons. And these data storage, again, super simple. It's kind of like data here. It's like a point that you have to cover because you store data within the token, right? That's a given utility, and that's it. Everything pretty much can be attributed to these things. I'm sure I've missed something, but these are the 3 main kind of things. And then from here you can decide what you want specifically. Maybe you want people to stake for a benefit, then for accessing something premium, then for discounts on fees. Maybe you also want to have governance and you want to have an insurance pool, whatever it is, right? These are the main 3 kind of things with, let's say, the main 4 utilities. But this is how you figure it out. You figure it out like this. You visualize all of the different flows that you have in your economy, and then you tokenize some of them. That's how you create real token utilities. What most projects do, and this is the problem, what most projects do is they just think, staking, governance, and rewards. Perfect. That's done deal. Thank you very much, Charles. You have figured out what a token utility is going to be. Awful. Terrible. That's what most projects do. It's terrible. Why? Because maybe you don't have this flow, right? Maybe if you had a token, you wouldn't have this flow. This person doesn't exist, right? No one is paying your monthly subscription. Why do you have staking? This person is literally paying you for some sort of product. They're not staking. You can't have staking here. Why would you give them a service for them staking? Staking is a benefit in the short term, right? This is a topic that I'll talk about in the next video, which is the token utility staking specifically. But you can't just integrate staking here. Also over here, do you see governance anywhere? Where's the governance? There is no governance because you're a company. You're not letting people govern. Why would you have governance as a token utility? If you don't figure out what in your ecosystem the actual flows of value are, who is trading with who is doing what for who, how is it all connected? If you don't derive your token utilities from that, you will have a token that separates your token holders and your users. Those are very different entities, and I will explain that in another video in more depth. But fundamentally, let's go back to the example of staking. This user doesn't exist. So you allow staking, and that means that a random person over here, this person over here, they can come in, they can buy the token, they can stake the token, and then they're earning some sort of yield, right? I'm assuming that's why you have staking. They're earning some sort of reward. Then give it 6 months, they unstake the token, they sell all the tokens that you've given them an extra yield, and they leave for the next project. You have just lost a lot of value from your ecosystem. You've given it away to someone who has never done anything for you. They were never an LP. They were never user 1. They were never user 2. They've done nothing for your ecosystem, but you're giving them value. For what? That's the problem. That's the problem with just pulling utilities out of thin air and applying them to your project. It doesn't work because your users are not going to be using the token like that. And then it begs the question, why even have a token in the first place if your users aren't the ones using it? Do you think this LP is going to participate in this staking? Maybe he will, probably he won't. He's already earning a yield for providing the LP, right? Why would he do something else? He wouldn't. So that's how you figure out your token utilities. You look at your business, you tokenize some stuff, and those are your token utility. If you want a very, very big why for the token, well, maybe you're a decentralized entity, probably not. Probably you're just a company. Well, it's a good thing to have your own token. You're not relying on fiat. You're not relying on Bitcoin. You're not relying on USDT. You're relying on your own token, and that is perfectly fine, perfectly acceptable. And that is a very strong why for your own token. Now, thank you very much for joining. This has been Token Utilities and designing your own. Stay tuned for the next one.